And action!
I just paid for something.
Yeah. Okay, and action.
Hello, I'm Matthew, the director of Noctiphobia, a short psychological thriller about an overworked, sleep-deprived college student being haunted by a demon taking the form of an owl. This project is part of my Unit 8 assignment for my UAL Level 3 Creative Media course, and it's essentially my final project that I have to oversee myself, and this behind the scenes video counts towards the evidence for that project, so this is going to be one big run through of every stage in development and every issue faced in pre-production, main production and post-production. But let's start with the main concepts for this film, the inspirations, themes and tone. I had an idea for a film many years ago about a kid who wanted to be an artist who drew pictures of an owl and eventually became an owl serial killer. It was very inspired by Donnie Darko, but it didn't get very far into development at all, apart from the owl mask being made. Donnie Darko is still a big inspiration on this project though, in the costume design and in the way it resembles a human and an animal at the same time, and it has that rugged, uncanny look to it, and it's also inspired in the story structure and how it's hard to piece any of it together properly until you get to the end due to its psychological nature. As I've gotten older and had time to think about the original story I had in mind years ago, there's a lot more that I could put into it that's far more subtle and actually has some meaning. So I kept the owl idea and I turned it into a cryptid-like creature that haunts people, as I knew that I could make the costume, but instead I made the story be about a sleep-deprived college student. The idea definitely came from my personal work-life balance at college, as when deadlines come in my sleep usually goes out of the window and work takes priority. With this story theme though, I could use the idea of the owl to symbolise the main character's lack of sleep, as owls are famously nocturnal and also a predator. The main genre of the film is a psychological thriller. It's not a horror, it's supposed to creep you out more than have jump scares and loud noises. The creepy thriller elements are mostly used as a way to visualise the main character's struggle and emphasise the psychological part of the film too. The location of the film was my actual college, and I feel like the idea of a big office type building like that at night and being chased there is a really creepy idea, and I decided to take a lot of inspiration from other media projects like Five Nights at Freddy's for how they handled this sort of being someplace you shouldn't atmosphere. In those games, specifically the second one, there's a big feeling of isolation, and it's really unsettling. You're trapped in one room with creepy looking animatronic robots hunting you down from places you can't properly see. The camera angles in that game are from a security camera point of view, and while my film doesn't have that live recording or found footage type element, the shot types are very inspired by that series. The sound design in my film was also very inspired by the Five Nights series, like the subtle buzz and the echoed footsteps were added after watching recordings of those games. I feel like ambient sounds are incredibly important to making a believable world, but it has to be well balanced, and that's the hardest part. It just takes a lot of watching back and measuring all the audio levels up. So very early on, I decided on the visual style. It was very inspired by Psycho, which we watched back for our Unit 4 film analysis assignment. Back in the 60s, film and TV was recorded in a 4:3 aspect ratio and in black and white, and I decided that my film would be the same to pay respect and homage to early horror films, as their visual design is a large part of why I love those type of films. But I decided that a nice way to contrast the normal elements with the creepy ones was to use red when the owl was involved, as red is the colour of danger and blood and stands out most of the human eye. I also decided that to get across the feeling of it getting darker, I could simply lower the brightness and change the contrast as time progresses, and since it's in black and white, this works really well. So this is the stage where concept art could begin. So the costume for the most part I already had together for another film in a different series that'll start production soon. I only needed a cape and some gloves, but the owl mask was the thing that I needed to make from scratch. I started with a stretchy mask and glue gun fabric quite randomly until the mask underneath was completely covered, making sure to stretch the mask as much as I could to make sure the fabric doesn't restrict it too much. Once it was all covered in fur, I added stripes to just above the eyes and down the nose and put orange mesh in the eyes. I then added the beak with black foam laid on top of each other, added rings around the eyes out of that foam, and put feathers above the eyes too, though at first I put way too many feathers on it and it just looked like a fuzzball. Also, the suit I had was already purple, so I figured the mask should be that too, so that when it's in black and white, the contrast matches out, and in the end it came out really nicely. We had our first footage test at college on the 19th of April to see how the film would look. We tested the scene of the main character played by Tom Herriot working on his computer as it gets darker, and also a scene with Braxton Armstrong as the owl walking through hallways, and in the end, that footage actually ended up being in the final film, because when we eventually started production, we started having camera troubles, which I'll get onto more later, but also the test shots just looked really good. I'd sent them out to people and asked for opinions, and everybody reacted really positively, so I knew that it'd work well in the final film. I also snuck some foreshadowing for one of these shots in the first scene too. When the main character played by Tom first falls asleep at his desk, he sees flashes of where the owl will later appear to get him before he wakes up again. The plot beats were written out very early on in the process. We start with the shots of the empty hallways where the film will take place, then a student overworks and stays behind at college, which strains his relationship and ruins his sleep pattern. His poor habits are personified by an evil owl that hunts him down. Then when he gets caught, he wakes up and questions if it was ever real. But now it's way past midnight and he should really go home, but the psychological damage has already been done. After the initial plot beats were written out, the first scene to be filmed was scripted, which was the introduction to our main character played by Tom. And after that scene was actually scripted, I decided to try and shoot it then to see how it would work. Initially in the script, the text message sequence was actually a phone call. However, due to microphone issues on the day, it didn't really work out because the distance from the camera to the actors was different from shot to shot. Also, Tom had only just read the script, so it just kind of fell off due to time limitations. We didn't have time to practice it properly. However, the footage was still usable. I just changed the idea of it being a phone call into a series of text messages. I feel like that choice worked in the film's favour though, as I could convey the idea that our protagonist's attempts to get through to their partner aren't working, and it adds to the isolated feeling of the whole thing, as well as adding clear character-defining traits to the main character, which can be hard with it being a short film. After recording and editing the first scene, I realised it was probably just best to film the scenes using the initial plot beats that were written out, instead of writing a script for each individual scene. So I just stuck to those plot beats and planned out the shots that I knew I needed to get, using mostly a shot list or just using test photos from home, and this sped up the process a lot. So Noctiphobia was filmed at my local college I attend, which is Furness College. I've done a few advertisements for them before as part of my Unit 5 and 6 coursework, and they're really great and let us film there. It was all done in class time and filmed in April and May, so the way we made it look like it was getting darker was by adjusting the brightness and contrast, and planning the shots so no windows were in frame. This also meant we had to wait for rooms to be empty though, and there was quite a few times where other students walked into a shot and were quite confused about the big purple owl creature. So actually finding the time to film could be quite hard. But I planned out each scene equally so it wouldn't take too long, but the time it took to shoot was longer than I expected. On top of waiting for places to be available, we also had to stick to COVID restrictions everywhere possible, and every time any cast or crew isn't in frame, they're all wearing a mask at all times, and socially distanced. But there was plenty of times where we had perfectly good takes that were completely unusable, because nobody noticed that our main actor Tom still had his mask on, so costume continuity was also something we had to take note of, as it was filmed over the course of a few days. The absolute worst problem we encountered while filming though was dead pixels. Not once in the 5 years of filming have I ever had an issue like this. While filming, my personal camera that I brought in developed dead pixels or something of that sort on the sensor of my lens. Now, I'd previously had money paid to fix this problem before, but it reappeared while filming this time. So after I switched to college's cameras, which there were two of, both had the same issue. There wasn't any misuse or mistreatment of the cameras, and lens caps were kept on and the camera was turned off when not filming, and nothing was damaged. Now, dead pixels do develop over time, but 3 cameras having that problem all at the same time was quite devastating. But luckily, I worked out a way to fix this, and that's going to be shown in the VFX section at the end. But first, here's the bloopers.
And action!
I just picked this up.
Yeah.
Please select a track.
What you did me.
Give us a wave.
Yeah.
And action.
Oh.
Oh, right, I forgot. Yeah.
Oh, like Jack Daniels or something, have it in his hand and be like, man.
Oh. Yeah.
Man, you good?
You good? Owl. Owl boy.
That's me. I'm hoot hoot. I mean, how?
Action. Sprint. Then walk. Oh. Care to say something for the behind the scenes?
I'm very confused as to how I ended up here. I don't think I'm going to be doing this again for a while.
Give me
I have the battery.
Okay, and action. That can go in the bloopers. It's all good, don't worry.
Is he purposely screwing up?
Yes, yes he is.
Swear to God.
just what's out of the scene.
The owl just walked into the scene, he's like, come on, I've got a whole thing planned.
So the visual effects were done in both Premiere Pro and After Effects, which are both Adobe products which you have to pay for. But luckily, I also had access to the full Adobe suite on Furness College's student plan. The VFX was the essential part to the film though, as it wouldn't be creepy at all without the visual design I put so much work into planning. The VFX was going to bring the film together and really complete the tone and the feel, and there ended up being a lot more VFX than I had initially planned, so I'm going to do a step-by-step tutorial on every major piece of VFX work in the film, starting with how I achieved the black and white and 4:3 aspect ratio effect in Premiere Pro. Okay, so here we are in Premiere, and the first thing we're going to do is get our footage from the File Explorer and import it in, and then drag it into our timeline. And once we've got the footage ready, we're going to go to the top left corner and go to Sequence and then Sequence Settings and change the frame size to fit our desired aspect ratio. I'm going with 1400 pixels by 1050 pixels, which is 4:3, but you can go with whatever you like. And that is how you properly change the frame size of your videos. Now we're going to go to the Project tab and add an adjustment layer, and we're going to drag that over all of our footage. And what an adjustment layer does is that any effects that are added to that layer will affect all the videos that are underneath it. So if you change the saturation or the brightness and contrast, it'll affect all the videos underneath, so you don't need to do it individually. Now we're going to go to the Effects tab and find ASC CDL, which changes all the colour and the saturation in the film, and just dial the saturation down until it's at 0, and this will achieve black and white. Also, the brightness and contrast effect will really help sell this look. Okay, so to achieve the red glowing eye effect, we need to move over to After Effects, but just import your footage as you would with Premiere Pro. But then once you've done that, go to the Tracker and Track Motion, and we need to find a point of high contrast that moves in the image so we can map the eyes to it. And I eventually settled on a feather just above the eye. Now, it can take a bit of messing around to find the right place to put your motion tracker, but once you've done this, just track every frame forward and After Effects will manage all that automatically. Now, there can be some jankiness to it that you'll have to sort out manually, but we can do that by using keyframes later. But once you've got the motion tracked, just create a null layer and set that as the tracker target. Now, what a null object is it's an invisible layer that you can map the movements to other layers by making the null object the parent of those layers. It's a bit confusing, but you'll see. Next, what we need to do is go to Layer, New, and then New Solid. And what that is it's essentially a big solid colour that will fill the screen. So just set that to red, click OK, and then OK again, and now it'll completely fill the screen, but don't worry, we use the ellipse tool to create it into a circle. Now that the red solid matches the shape that we want, we just need to make the null object the parent of that layer, and that way it'll inherit all the motions from that null object that's tracked to the feather. Don't forget to also turn on motion blur on the red solid, so that way it just sort of looks right when the camera moves and shakes. Here I changed the centre of origin on our masked out circle to be in the centre. That way when you rotate the circle, it'll rotate from the middle instead of from the outside. Once you've set the centre of origin, just resize it and rotate it until it fits into the eye position you have planned out. Once you have your position sorted, go to the Effects and Presets tab and find the Gaussian blur effect, and then put that on your red solid and dial it up until the blur starts to look more like a glow. Once you've done that, set the blending mode to lighten or screen to make it act like an actual light source over your footage, and this really sells the effect. Okay, so now we're going to click on the red solid and press P to bring up the position, and we're going to click the little stopwatch which sets keyframes for the position. And what a keyframe is it interpolates between two different values. In this case, it's the position before and the position after. And we're going to just manually adjust it into the eye, so that way it works alongside the tracking and just makes the motion more smoother. Okay, so this next step's really simple. All we need to do is click on the red solid and then press Ctrl C and Ctrl V, and what this will do is it will copy and paste that red solid and essentially make an exact duplicate. Then we need to make the null object a parent of that red solid too, and then change the position to match with the other eye. Then once we've done that, just duplicate both eyes again, make them smaller and make them white, and this will be the center of the light source. Now that we've done the eyes, we're going to do the actual background glow. So we're going to copy and paste the background to make a duplicate of it, and then use the ellipse tool to make a circle around where the eyes will be. And then don't forget to feather it so it blends in with the background. And then once we've done that, we're going to add the curves effect to the mask, and then make it bright red. Now we have the top background layer masked, feathered and coloured. So all we need to do is make the bottom background layer in black and white. Luckily, there's an effect that's just called black and white which will do that for you. So to get rid of dead pixels, I use Premiere Pro, so let's just import the footage from the File Explorer like we would with any project. Then we need to zoom into 400% to find the dead pixel in the frame. So here we can see it right here. Then we need to copy the background layer and place it above the original, so we have two duplicate layers just layered on top of each other. Now on the top layer we need to mask around the dead pixel. Now this can be quite hard, but you can adjust it to fit later. After this I made colour corrections and made it in black and white. Now this isn't an essential part of the process, but it can help. To actually get rid of the dead pixel, what we need to do is we need to blur the masked layer where the dead pixel is located. So just go in your effects tab and look for the Gaussian blur, and then add that to your masked footage. Then set it to keyframe, so that way it can change between the background contrast because that messes with it. And also set the mask feather to be 0 because that also messes with it. And it should look invisible, but you'll have to keyframe it and manually adjust the blur so that it matches with the background, as you can see here. I had a test screening at college on the 30th of April, with my teachers and classmates watching the first finished draft of the film, and the reception was really positive. Everybody really understood the themes and tone and the story ideas, and there was no real negative feedback about the choices, just small pieces of constructive criticism which I listened to and fixed in the final version, such as the music fading better, the owl being a bit brighter on screen to have more of a scare when it eventually shows up, and the intro shots were originally handheld, but one of my tutors said he thinks it should be a static shot, and after giving some thought to the idea, I agreed, so I just took a still frame from those clips and added some noise to give it life. But after that, the final version of the film was completed, and it's set to have its public debut on YouTube on Halloween 2021. Now this film was very hard to make, but I'm incredibly proud of it, and I think it's the best thing I've ever made. The story really reflects the process, not with the demon owl creature, but with the overworking and the sleepless nights. But I believe it all paid off well, and the reception it's gotten alone makes it all worth it for me, even if I don't get the mark that I hope for in this work. It was a real learning process with a lot of mistakes, but ultimately the final product came out just as I planned and in the time frame I wanted to. I'd say though the hardest part about making this was actually this behind the scenes video you're watching. The length of it is way longer than the film itself, and it also took far longer to record and edit, but I hope it gives insight into how this project was made and maybe gives you some inspiration for other projects or teaches you something about visual effects or anything of the sort that I've talked about in this video. But as I'm saying this in the very early hours of the morning, having no sleep, with my final deadline in 5 short hours, I'd say that this effort was definitely worth it. And thank you for watching.